So Matthew is a futurist. And what Matthew is going to do, he's going to explain what that is rather than me. What Matthew's going to do is show you the mind-blowing potential of the future and how it's going to impact all of us. So with that build up,
excellent.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I wish I could see beyond what I can see. I wish I could touch beyond.
So, how many of you were watching this video when it was playing? Did you see it all? What did you think of it? Okay, good, marks out of 10. Not good. No, it's horrible. So, what you're actually watching, this isn't a pop singer. This is an artificial intelligence. The song basically is produced by an artificial intelligence called Ampner. They've had over 500 million YouTube views, and they've been signed by Sony. And it's just one of the new wave, basically, if you think of deep fake extrapolated out, these are the advanced deep fakes, basically, so synthetic content and everything else that are turning and will continue to turn the entertainment industry on their heads as organizations like Warner Brothers and Sony keep signing up more and more virtual artists. And as these things get better and better and better. When I go around the world, typically that video over the past 2 years, everywhere from South Africa to Sydney to New York, basically has typically got about a 7.5 out of 10. Which I typically think if that was on an Amazon review, most people would be buying it. Which is why Sony did buy it. So my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm a futurist. I work in two types of futures. I work in the sort of near future, which is the kind of the next 20 years. That's where most organizations and multinationals sit. I also work in deep futures, which is the next 20 to 50 years out. The reason why I go 20 to 50 years out is because a lot of the organizations that I work with are sovereign governments. So I work with all G7, most of the G20. And if you are trying to figure out what the future of a country looks like, particularly in sort of current times, you want to understand what the future of transportation, infrastructure, energy, jobs, skills, and all those kinds of things look like. So the presentation that I'm going to walk you through today, I've called future-proof. Because as I travel around the world, lots of people ask, how do you actually future-proof either yourselves, your families, or your organizations, or your countries? And it's a little bit easier than you think, certainly from a conceptual standpoint. It's easy to talk about, a bit harder to do. I work with a whole variety of organizations, Legal & General, who've got $1.2 trillion under management, Denton's, the world's largest law firm, Centrica, who you might know and love, where we are reinventing energy, Deloitte, Airbus, where we talk about flying cars, T-Mobile, where we talk about 5G, Sky, which is the future of entertainment, GEMS on the education side, and so on and so forth, and then Samsung and Huawei on the future of devices. So everything is changing. There is not a single industry today that isn't being ripped down or torn apart. However, sort of consider this. If I went back, and I've got loads of different examples, but bring it home. If I went back 10 years ago to 2010, and I was lucky enough to be able to sit down with every single CEO of every single major automotive organization in the world. And I said, thanks for your time. Lovely to be here. I've looked into my crystal ball, and I think in the next 7 years, and by 2015, 2016, 2017, you will all be in a flat-out arms race to create fully autonomous vehicles. You will no longer be basing your future business models on selling cars. You will be spending hundreds of billions of dollars electrifying your vehicles. And then some of you will also be developing flying cars. At what point do you think I would be shown that? That's what, 7 years ago? And yet here we are. We are in a full tilt arms race basically within the global transportation industry, and it's not just cars, it's absolutely everything. And the same is true for cybersecurity. If you step back to the 1980s and said, in the future, I think cybersecurity is a thing when we're talking about future jobs and skills. From an educator's perspective, they'd look at that and say, okay, cybersecurity, what is that? And you tell them, and they'd say, well, that sounds like a futuristic policeman. And you say, well, these are the people who secure systems and devices and things over this thing called the internet. And they go, what's this thing called the internet? Well, it connects 3.5 billion people on the planet together. It's changed global society. That was 40 years ago. You think you'd be kicked out again? There's lots of time. Yeah, my butt gets sore, frankly. So how many of when we start having a look at the pace of change, how many of you feel that today we're moving faster than we did 10 years ago? Whether it's societally, personally, whatever it happens to be. Hands up. Okay. In the interest of fairness, how many of you think we're moving slower? No one. If we fast forward, say, to 2030 and I ask the same question, do you think 2030 we're going to be moving faster or slower? Hands up for faster. Hands up for slower. So we're accelerating. He put his hand up for slower. I have a video for him. Part of the reason for this is if you sort of step back to the 1980s and 1990s, and I say to you, next year, what could you do from a technology perspective and a product perspective that you couldn't do this year? You might look at something like computers, Moore's Law, and computer chips, and say, well, next year, computer chips are going to be faster, and the cost per IOP is going to be cheaper, therefore we can ingest more information, analyze more information, and do more things with it, whatever that kind of happens to be. However, when I ask you that same question today, I say, what do you think you can do with technology as a business next year that you maybe couldn't do this year? I'm now asking you about 5G, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, blockchain, quantum computing, robotics, virtual reality, and all these kinds of things. On top of that, I'm then asking you if you're moving to cloud, if you're digitizing your business. All of a sudden, getting your head around what you can do with 5G as a business is hard enough. Trying to figure out what happens when you combine these technologies then gets harder, and then trying to keep up with everything gets even harder. However, when we start having a look at the pace of change, and I won't go through this in detail, but when we start having a look at the number of startups around the world, over the past 5 years, there have been over 100 million new startups. Those startups are trying to find holes in your business models, in your value chains. They're trying to find opportunities. This is your cultural side of things. These are the people who are trying to find problems to solve that have got a value, basically, that are worth solving. Once they've found their problem and they've kind of done their traditional innovation piece, they then inevitably make products using technology. So if you think about the chairs that you sit on, there was a manufacturing technology about that. Basically, when you have a look at the plastics, that's technology-based. So we find a problem, we create a new solution to address that problem, and we use a variety of different technologies in combination. So now we have our game-changing technology, and we still have the problem of getting it into the market. So this is where it's got to be accessible, affordable, cultural bias. If you have a look, for example, at fully autonomous vehicles, some people just don't want to get in them. So they're not going to get in them until they're forced to. Cultural alignment. Yeah, if I created a fantastic product today, but it burnt half the rainforest down, you're not probably going to buy it. Regulators. If the regulator says no, you're dead. Standards. Standards help accelerate the move into the world. And then geopolitics. If I'm a Chinese organization, I built something fantastic and I'm trying to sell that to the US government, it's likely that I'm not going to be successful. And so on and so on and so on. So here we have over 100 million new startups around the world. Here we have just a couple of exponential technologies you can do some interesting things with, but that's not the full story, by the way. And here you have over 2 to 3 billion people connected. Find the right levers and you can get your product into the market quicker than ever before. As an example of this, and this I use this with some investors, it took the telephone 75 years to reach 50 million users, right? You've seen this chart before. It took Pokemon Go 19 days to hit 50 million users. It took Call of Duty 6 days to hit 100 million users. So as the world becomes increasingly digitized, as industries become increasingly digitized, as products and services become increasingly digitized, and as we become increasingly connected, at what point, as an entrepreneur or a business, do I create something that's really good? I hit all the right execution levers, and all of a sudden, I don't know what that's doing, all of a sudden, I now have 200, 300, 400, 500 million people downloading whatever it is that I've created or using whatever it is that I've created. And at what point do you disrupt an entire industry in a day?
But in 2 months' time, Pokemon Go users dropped by 75%.
Yeah.
So it's about quality as well.
Yes, absolutely. And then that comes down to reliability as well. So when we start looking at pushing things into the market, if you have an unreliable train service like I got on this morning, you're probably unlikely to want to use it. So no, you're absolutely right. So there's all these different things that sort of play into that. But which is why when you have a look at getting things into the market and the right levers, there's like 50 things. It's not just one. However, when we start having a look at all of these different industries, as you digitize an industry, all of the individual boundaries between these industries start collapsing. So, for example, if we have a look at utilities, if I drop the cost of electricity to 0, we'll discuss that, that proliferates through every single industry. If I can create robo-lawyers, that proliferates through every individual industry. If I change the agricultural space, then the food in your canteen comes from a different source. So every single industry is connected. So changes in one industry can proliferate around other industries very, very quickly. However, as we start having a little bit of a look into the deep future, how many of you believe in magic? Yeah. Are you a magician? See, this is the thing. Yeah, when we all walked into this room, how many of you looked up at the artificial suns in the ceiling and went, wow, artificial suns? 200 years ago, anyone that walked into this room and saw those basically would have been marveled by them. We're not, because we're educated and we understand this is technology. You know, if you go back to ancient Greek times, basically you take one of those bird scooters back to the first Olympic Games and you can outpace the world's fastest sprinter. You go, what is this magical chariot that you are on? And you go, it is called a scooter. And you can rent one on your smartphone app. And he goes, what's that? And he goes, well, yeah, I'm going back to the future. So what I'm going to do is, if you think of every science fiction technology that you can think of is now here. I'm going to try and prove a point here. In a basic level, deflector shields. You fire a laser at the Earth's upper atmosphere, you can create something called a Fermi lens effect. It deflects lasers. That is from British Aerospace. Holograms. Now, we've got to show you some of this stuff. I'm a futurist, so let's show you some of this stuff. You know those big sort of science fiction holographic adverts that you see in the movies, like Blade Runner and everything else? This is like granddaddy. This is the great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy of these technologies. There is no augmented reality glass. Well, there is no glass, no augmented reality gimmicks. This is the real deal. Today it's this big, tomorrow it's this big, then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you go and buy it down PC World. Obviously the online version of PC World, because the brick and mortar one, basically they wouldn't have been able to 3D print that building yet. So these are multicolored, you can interact with them and everything else, but that's done using something called femto lasers. That's a genuine hologram, one of the world's first. There's 2 now. Science fiction becomes science fact. And it keeps going. It's very pretty. Knowledge uploading. In 2015, the US government put 30 Top Gun pilots into an F-35 simulator, took the F-35s up to 30,000 feet, put skull caps onto their Top Gun pilots, recorded their brain waves, put the F-35s into a flat spin, and told the Top Guns to land the plane. All the Top Guns naturally managed to land the plane. What they then did is they then took 30 volunteers with no flight experience whatsoever, put the skull caps on them, replayed the brain waves back into their heads because the brain is plastic, and 60% of the people landed the F-35s out of a flat spin with no prior flight experience. The people who couldn't land them didn't have the kinetic responses basically to do so. At the time, basically, this knowledge uploading lasted about 30 minutes, and the critics at the time said only lasted 30 minutes, and everyone went, kind of missing the point. So knowledge uploading is increasingly a thing. And there's now a $50 million project basically over in the US to bolster that. Lightsabers. Who likes lightsabers? Who likes Star Wars? Who's got kids that like Star Wars? We have a lightsaber, an actual lightsaber. But all that we had to do is we had to combine photons with electrons to create a completely new state of plasma matter. And what we now have is we now have little lightsabers that can be used in surgery. They're this size, but they are genuine, bona fide lightsabers that can cut through stuff. You want to Google this stuff, it's either on my website, you can ask me and everything else. I can show you basically that this is actually here. I've got pictures, videos, all sorts of fake imagery. Telepathy. If you've ever played Tetris, you've probably played it on a glass screen, right? What we did is we used a mixture of brain-machine interface technologies. We connected 3 people up to something called a brain net, and then they played telepathic Tetris. We can increasingly do lots and lots of things, basically, with the mind. But that particular technology goes to internet scale. If you've got enough what we call TMS devices, you can take it to internet scale. However, if you've also got children, how many of you would like to stream your child's thoughts to YouTube? So I can see that's a popular one. So I think that might meet some cultural resistance when we're pushing that one into the marketplace. Oh, there we go. Oh. So there you go. So what we have here is we're using, again, basically we're using skull caps in combination with artificial intelligence to read people's minds. But we can convert the images that they are seeing on a screen and the brain waves, basically, that they're seeing on a screen into TV feeds. The Russians have just brought out a new one where you can actually watch sort of relatively complex films in real time, and it'll do this kind of thing. It's very grainy, but in 3 to 4 years' time, this is going to be really clean. But if I asked you what images these were, you'd say, well, it's a cross, it's a sort of dot. We're reading information from billions of human synapses in real time and converting them into images that you can put on the TV. This is already being used in healthcare to help people with locked-in syndrome communicate, because you can do texts and all that kind of stuff as well. So increasingly, we are unlocking all the secrets of the human mind. And it keeps going. However, you know, at the start of this sort of presentation, basically we talked about, 5, 6 exponential technologies, AI, blockchain, all the things that you've heard about. There aren't 5 or 6 technologies that I talked about. I track over 500 exponential technologies. I can only fit 180 on this thing I call a starburst. This is the first time this has been shown this year. This is the brand new one. It's the 2020 version. It goes from 2020 to 2070. It's got 168 exponential technologies on it. Every single exponential technology can either change one industry or all of them. Artificial intelligence on here is 1 dot. So I'm up against time. However, if you want to play a little bit of bingo, do you want to play, what do you want to play? Advanced manufacturing or biotech bingo? Biotech. Okay, pick a number between 1 and 16. 7. What have you read? In vivo gene editing. Very good. Okay, so if you have an inherited genetic disease, that gets scary fairly quickly, that one as well. If you have an inherited genetic disease, and there are 6,000 of these on the planet, so you're spoiling my thunder from a little bit later. If you have Hunter's syndrome, which is an inherited genetic disease, you've got good news, and the good news is that in 20 years you die, and that's it, you're gone. The bad news, that's the good news. The bad news is you die painfully throughout those 20 years. So what we can do with in vivo gene editing, we did this now 2 years ago. You put something like a CRISPR gene editing tool into an intravenous drip. We put the Hunter's syndrome patient into a regular hospital bed, put him onto the IV drip. The gene editing tools find the bad part of the bad genes, take them out, clip in the right ones. That particular patient, called patient X, no longer has Hunter's syndrome. In vivo gene editing means that we are able to edit your genome in vivo while you're alive. So that's a fun one. That's good. I won't do many of these, but you can read there's a codex on my website you can download if you like. Connectivity or electronics? You have to pick one. Okay, connectivity, number 1 to 11. 5G. So 5G will let you connect at 1.5 gigabits a second. If you have a look at 5G, basically it's a massive MIMO network. And increasingly, basically, we're rolling out low band, mid band, and millimeter wave 5G technologies. 5G starts opening up a whole variety of new applications, particularly when we start having a look at the interactive space. And again, that's changing everything. And then I won't go through all of them. But if you have a look at intelligence, we'll talk about creative machines. If you want to create new things, you need materials. So the idea behind this wheel is you need to manufacture something, you need computer power, you need to connect it, you need electronics, energy, intelligence into it, you need to make it out of something, you need to secure it, and then you need some sensors and a user experience on the top of it. So robots, we recently created the world's first living robots. And I'm going to go through some of these other technologies as we go round. But from a user experience perspective, we've got 11K displays coming through. We've got haptics. Haptics so obviously brings virtual reality to life. We've also got memory transfer and memory editing as well. So there's lots sort of going on in that space. But as we sort of put the starburst to bed, this is a company basically in the year 2040. So I thought I'd take you through the future a little bit, and then we bring it back. This is the world's first artificial intelligence politician, which we could probably do with right now. It was created in the year 2018 by the Chinese government as a negotiator. So if you do trade negotiations with the Chinese government now, their foreign office now or their equivalent of their foreign office now has an artificial intelligence negotiator that will tell you basically all the opponent's weaknesses. However, and there's a lot of robo-automation technologies coming through like that one. However, I've now spotted 15 of these fully autonomous companies. We have fully autonomous companies coming out of Hong Kong and Wall Street. Typically, they're constrained to the financial services sector and the communications sector.
What does that even mean?
An autonomous company. So an autonomous company is a company that uses a mixture of technologies, and you can throw in a bunch, RPA, blockchain, artificial intelligence, but it runs basically without any form of human oversight at all. So if the humans who created it die, as in Ada, which is a hedge fund, that's a whole conversation itself. There's Skynet's coming as well, but yeah, this is friendlier. But with an autonomous company, they need no human involvement, no human oversight. And if the people who created them die, they keep running. Now, from an artificial intelligence perspective, as we increasingly use robos, she's got a variety of different names, but we can call her Nia. This is from Soul Machines. This is a high-definition neural network avatar. So she's essentially a bot, but she's a very, very advanced bot. There are videos of her, based on her friends. One of her friends has just taught 250,000 school children about renewable energy. She's being used by Mercedes-Benz in customer service. She's being used by Rolls-Royce. She's being used in NatWest, basically to start selling mortgages, or at least advising on mortgages and all sorts of things. So AI needs a face. When we start having a look at some of these avatars as well, some weirdness creeping into the Fortune 100, we now have 5 Fortune 100 CEOs who are now digitizing themselves and turning themselves into these neural network avatars, with the idea being that when they die, the boards can just dial them up and say, Brian, we're looking at doing a merger with company X. What's your thoughts? And with enough data, bearing in mind there's a huge amount of data on all of us, this thing will come back and say, well, actually, I didn't have a very good experience with company X because of Y. Therefore, my recommendation is Z. So increasingly, avatars basically are being used by some CEOs to try to cheat death. But then you could also turn yourself into an avatar and start selling your services, because that CEO could start advising other people if he wanted to, or she wanted to. Increasingly, when we have a look at data volumes around the planet, basically we are going to the zeta scale. However, we're also already starting to get to the point today where we can see the hive mind economy emerging. So for example, Google, a number of examples here. If I train one robot one thing, it will train the rest of the fleet. So you can instantly upgrade robots basically in a way that you could never do before. If you have a fully autonomous vehicle, for example, in Japan, and it senses or sees something different that maybe it has never seen before, it can figure out what it is, and using these hive mind-like technologies, because there isn't really a better name for them, it can go off and teach the rest of the fleet in America and say, if you see something that looks like this, this is what it is, avoid it. So increasingly, as we connect all of these different devices together, we connect them into the cloud, we connect them up with artificial intelligence, you end up with different devices all over the planet being able to train other devices all over the planet. That starts changing things. Now, from a workforce perspective, this just sort of brings in a whole variety of craziness. However, when we start having a look at some of these automation technologies, inevitably, basically, more and more roles basically will be automated. However, in some cases, a career may no longer be for life. So one of the organizations I work for basically is Denton's. Basically, if you have a look at bankruptcy law, increasingly they're trying to automate bankruptcy law. In addition to that, as we start accelerating through the future, the human is the differentiator. Because you either have the choice to deal with a set of autonomous technologies in the call center or whatever it happens to be, but increasingly humans will be the differentiator because machines have no empathy. You can code fake empathy into them, we've done that, but you can't code, they're not natively empathetic. So from a workforce perspective, we're all going to need to be increasingly adaptable, but we're also going to need each other's support, both at a societal level, a social level, but also an organizational level. And when you start having a look at the sheer volume of change that's coming at us, humans are still the best machines on the planet, basically, to try to make sense of it all and navigate it. So what I'm going to do, though, is a lot of as these technologies become increasingly powerful, they increasingly become democratized, they become increasingly available. This is where now, when we start talking about moving from one career or one job type, basically, to another job type, we can do some interesting things. So I thought we'd play a game. What skill would you like to use today? And I'm being careful with the word use, not learn. Would you like to use creativity? Would you like to use programming? Or would you like to use law? So as we combine artificial intelligence with new behavioral computing platforms, which one's your favorite? Have you got a favorite? Excellent. Creativity. See, I like the fact you actually said that because, congratulations, you picked creativity. However, I'm going to explain these two. How many of you can program? Okay. So today, bearing in mind that as we accelerate, these things come through. On the one hand, we've got the development of no-code platforms coming through, like Betty Blocks, basically, which let you drag and drop. I mean, if I asked you 10, 20 years ago how many of you could design a website, you'd have all probably said no. But if I said, I will give you £1 million if you go and design a website and show it to me tomorrow, you'd probably go to wix.com, start dragging some stuff about, you're done. Okay? So we're democratizing programming in a variety of different ways, but we're at the very start of this. So Microsoft have got a program called Deep Coder, which will go to GitHub, Stack Overflow, it's an artificial intelligence. It will scavenge code, bring the code back, and compile it, and say, is that the application you wanted? So you talk to the computer, and you say, I would like you to create application type A, and it goes off, scavenges the code, brings it back, but that's 5 lines of code at the moment. Google have got a platform called Bayou, and it does 100 lines of code, and then we've got a company called DeepTab9, basically, which is like an advanced auto-compile. So in the future, if you want to program something, you'll just be able to use behavioral computing, so you just talk, you tell the system what you want it to build, it builds it. Congratulations, you are now using programming skills in a different way, and this accelerates and all that sort of stuff. From a legal perspective, if you go to companies like Ross Intelligence and Law Geeks, you can say, create me a non-disclosure agreement. I'm not a lawyer, but the system will come back and say, well, what sort of NDA do you want? What services do you want covered? And I say, I would like this service, and I would like this type of clause, and I'd like limited liability. So it prompts. And then they'll pull the contracts together, and off we go. However, creativity. I'm going to prove the point. From a creative perspective, how many of you are stunning artists? No, none. You haven't hired them on their artistry skills then? No. Okay. How many of you are insanely bad at art or drawing? Insanely bad. Yes, you have so many bad drawing artists basically in your company. It's amazing. Now, so what we're going to do is we're now going to pick creativity, the creativity skill, because I want to use it. I don't want to learn it. I want to use it.
Let's try and darken that up a bit with some cloud. Oh, that's wonderful. What if we were to change all that to rock?
Okay, let's click on rock, and we gotta replace the mountain.
Let's try waterfall just by pulling water down from the top there.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be great if everybody could be an artist? If we could take our ideas and turn them into compelling images? This technology allows us to create a smart paintbrush so that if you wanted to create a new picture, you can just draw the shapes of the objects that you want, and the neural network can then fill in all the details. If we add a water feature, the network is able to add reflections, not because we told it that, but because it learned it. Or if we change the ground to be covered in snow, then it knows that the sky also needs to be a different color. I really think this technology is going to be great for architects, designers, people making virtual worlds to train robots and self-driving cars. The input to this model is something we call a segmentation map. It's like a coloring book picture that describes here's where a tree is, here's where the sky is, here's where the ground is, and it doesn't have any details. And then the neural network is able to fill in all of the texture and shadows and the colors based on things that it's learned from a large database of real-world images.
I would like to see that tree reflecting in that pond.
The real advance here is that we're able to synthesize images with a lot more diversity and more fidelity than we were able to in the past. I really think this technology is going to be great for the dreamers of the world.
So with artificial intelligence, we are getting to the point where we can use it to democratize access to expertise. That's a game changer when we start looking at future workforces. Now, in addition to that, if you really can't be bothered to pick up a pen, you could just write the type of video that you want. This is out of Princeton, so you type what video you want to be created. The artificial intelligence will create a synthetic video completely from scratch. Now, at the moment, all of these things look grainy. You couldn't do this 2 years ago at all. In 2 years' time, 3 years' time, these things basically will be high definition perfect. Deep fakes, basically, in 3 years ago, deep fake, if you wanted to create a decent deep fake, it was in a lab, basically, out of Stanford. Now, basically, you can scan your face on a free app from Zhao, basically, in China, and you can put yourself into a Leonardo DiCaprio movie. This stuff moves really, really quickly. So as we start having a look at sort of how we train our future workforces, on the one hand, you still need, in fact, you need more soft skills than ever before. Adaptability is absolutely key, and this is what the organizations should provide. You need confidence, creativity, you still need that. Curiosity, entrepreneurship, empathy, ethics, exponential thinking, leadership, resourcefulness, storytelling, because we all like telling stories. Collaboration, but when we look at collaboration, increasingly we're going to be collaborating with people and machines. That's a different style of collaboration. And morality from an ethics perspective. However, when we start having a look at this furious rate of change and the impact that it's going to have on global and regional workforces, firstly, you've got to do some forecasting. So this is my team. Basically, we do this every Monday morning, generally. We see what the crystal ball pops out. And then we just sort of really have a quick debate about it, ask the AI, and then go for lunch, frankly. So you need to forecast. We can forecast more things than ever before because, for example, if you go out and you have a look at the taxi drivers, we know that autonomous cars are on the rise. The question then becomes, when will the taxi driver be made redundant by the autonomous car out the front? And we can kind of figure that out because we look at investment patterns and all that sort of stuff. In which case, we now start saying to the taxi driver, here's a construct that we can put you into to train you and move you to new skills. However, increasingly, people are going to have to be adaptable general specialists. The reason for this is we've been trained throughout our entire lives to become specialists in one thing. If that one thing starts dead-ending because we're unlucky or for whatever reason, basically, then that's our livelihood's gone. So increasingly, you need to be able to flip between different careers, in which case you'd start talking about inward job mobility. Learning platforms, if you have a look at things like edX, Coursera, Udacity, and everything else, increasingly, as more and more global organizations cry and clamor for particular skills, and they say, we've seen the rise of this thing called data science, these global learning platforms will start creating the courses for it. If you can track basically the jobs that are coming through at the bottom, and then you can track their ascendancy, you can figure out about 5 years in advance basically what future job skills are going to look like. I mean, do you think that we already have a shortage of quantum computer scientists, data scientists, and everything else? Of course we do. And then the 10,000-hour rule. Basically, it used to be said that if you wanted to learn something to an expert level, which is actually a fallacy, you'd have to take 10,000 hours. However, if I wanted to teach you the basics of, say, data science or cybersecurity or something else, we could sit down, accountancy, we could tell you what a P&L is. within 20 hours, you can get a decent foundation for a different type of job or career or skill. However, once we've done that, so that's inward job mobility, where we can see one job dead-ending, we have a variety of different jobs coming up. Now you need the right social contracts within companies, society, and government, because if I was an accountant and I'm starting to retrain early, because I saw my role sort of starting to go on the down low early, and I go basically to Microsoft and say, I'm a great data scientist, and they say, well, you used to be an accountant, so we just actually rather have someone who's always been a data scientist. You need to change societal contracts. And then as we start looking at the acceleration of things, we now have creative machines basically that can innovate over 10,000 times faster than anything else. For example, Under Armour are using artificial intelligence combined with creative machines to take the time that it takes for them to develop a shoe and to get it to the shelves from 18 months to 2 days. So NASA are using creative machines increasingly to design these types of lunar robots. General Motors, creative machines are starting to design their future cars. These are simply AIs. As we start having a look at how we push the rate of corporate innovation by hundreds of millions of fold, simulation engines. So what we do is we take all of the information that's being fed to us via the Internet of Things and feed it into a simulation model, and the computer will then create generation of the new product.
By trial and error. What we've done is train an algorithm to solve the Rubik's Cube one-handed with a robotic hand, which is actually pretty hard even for a human to do. We don't tell it how the hand needs to move the cube in order to get there. The particular friction that's on the fingers, how easy it is to turn the faces on the cube, what the gravity, what the weight of the cube is, all of these things, it needs to learn by itself. The interesting thing is that kind of standard techniques in robotics haven't been able to scale to that complexity that we see in a robotic hand. Humans have evolved to be able to manipulate and operate our hands. So there's a huge amount of learning that's happened through evolution to get us to this point as a species. And the robot has to learn all of this from scratch. Instead of trying to write very dedicated algorithms to operate such a hand, we took a different approach where we create thousands of different simulated environments and learn to do the task in all of those, and hopefully a robotic hand will be able to do it in the real world as well. This means like thousands of years of experience that this neural network has had in simulation. Every time the algorithm has gotten good at the task, we make the task harder. That's really crucial because it needs exposure to really complicated environments in order to eventually be robust to the real world.
So if I want to train a self-driving car 100 million times faster than I could in the real world, I put it into a simulation environment, as well as a whole variety of other things. And where these have already started making an impact, in Silico, which is an American biotech company, managed to use simulation engines to design 30,000 different drugs in 21 days with 3 game changers. So we have computational power of artificial intelligence, creative machines, basically sensors and information. You throw these into these virtual arenas, you can do all sorts of things. Another one, basically OpenAI managed to put an AI, just a basic AI, through 500 million games of hide and seek. And at the end of the 500 millionth game, a couple of weeks later, it had learned how to use tools and create tools. That's a human thing, or an intelligence thing. These simulated environments dramatically accelerate the pace of change across a whole variety of industries. As we start having a look at healthcare, there's a whole bunch of changes coming here. On the one hand, we're starting to democratize access to healthcare, but we can do it similarly. So if I start, earlier I talked about democratization. If I wanted to do a health check right here, right in front of you all, 5 years ago, would it be possible? You know, I'd have to get a doctor in, wouldn't I? Now what I do is I get a couple of students. I use the sensors on my phone and I use some artificial intelligence, and I can do the following thing. I look like I'm taking a selfie. I'm using artificial intelligence, machine vision, and the camera on my phone to detect the yellowness in my eyes to detect pancreatic cancer. I use the camera in my phone and artificial intelligence, show my skin, and it tells me whether or not I've got skin cancer. I talk into the microphone, and it tells me whether I'm getting ill, because when you get ill, your voice changes, you get a little bit gravelly. In addition to that, it can also tell me if I have PTSD, if I have the onset of Alzheimer's or dementia, which of course as a futurist I do. I could use the accelerometer, don't laugh, it's not funny. I could use the accelerometer in here with artificial intelligence and do this. And now I can suddenly tell whether or not I'm likely to have a heart attack. I just did a pretty full health check in front of you. Now you take that technology, which is basically a bunch of sensors, you stick it into a pod in a car. When you get into an autonomous Mercedes-Benz, you could have a health check. These pods are already starting to be sold. So I democratize access to primary health care with some students, a $200 smartphone or any form of camera. I can tell blood pressure and heart rate and all that sort of stuff very, very easily. We're 3D and 4D printing human organs. So we just recently printed a very miniature beating human heart. We can already 3D print functional human skin, bone, cartilage, corneas, livers, and all sorts of things. So in 20 years' time, when these start maturing, some of them are already being used by the NHS, but when we can 3D print a proper heart, in 20 years' time, if you have a heart attack, you can have your own heart. We take your stem cells, but we could do more than that, because we can also 3D print electronics. So I could say, do you want me to 3D print your regular human heart from your own stem cells? No fear of rejection, because it's based on your stem cells and your DNA. Would you like me to 3D print electronics into it? So that if there is a problem, it just restarts itself, monitors itself, whatever it happens to be. Designer humans, this was a scandal last year with a Chinese doctor. His experiment actually came off the back of an experiment we did with E. coli. If you change the telomeres at the end of a DNA sequence, viruses can't replicate. So about 2-3 years ago, we created bacteria that were resistant to every single known pathogen on Earth. That's what the doctor used in these babies when he tried to make them resistant to HIV, basically, and meningitis and a variety of other things. But increasingly, when we have a look at 2012, the London Olympics, where we are today, in 2012, they started testing for engineered athletes. So when we start looking at the future of healthcare and healthcare insurance and everything else, is this a question you're going to have to put on your sheets? Have you or any of your relatives been genetically engineered or re-engineered? Bearing in mind we have in vivo gene editing now. I could boost your testosterone levels if you wanted to. This is the one, basically, you spoiled my fun on. Thank you. So this is where increasingly we use a lot of these gene editing tools to eliminate a lot of traditionally hereditary diseases. This is incredibly powerful stuff. This is science fiction stuff today. But the reason why you won't see these everywhere is because the costs are still high, the regulators are freaking out and going, no. The insurance company's going, how do we insure this if this thing goes wrong? So liability plays in as well. But the technology is already here. And startups try to then sort of navigate these regulatory systems and hurdles and everything else to get these into the market. However, and I'm almost done, no more status quo. I want to take you through a couple of industries we're going to rip apart. Agriculture. How would you like to solve global famine? Should we do it now? Yeah, excellent. Do we have the technology? I think we do. Take lab-grown meat and a vertical farm, stick it into the middle of a desert, I can feed people in Timbuktu.
We've all been there, right? In the grocery store. Oh, I'll just buy this meat. And there it is, and all we have to do is buy it. We don't have to think about what it took to make that chicken in that nice packaging. But the reality of the way that it came about, it's incredibly unsustainable. And that's one of the biggest problems facing humanity right now. but we figured out a way to solve it. The whole idea is that that chicken in itself has an unlimited source of itself, and there is a way where you can take just a handful of cells and keep growing them essentially infinitely. For those very first cells, it was important to us how we got the cells, not just that we got the cells. We came up with the idea to use one feather from the single best chicken that we could find.
We picked out.
The first thing we need to do is we need to identify a cell that we are going to use as the basic starter material. And then what we need to do is find a food for it to grow in. So we have to identify the right set of nutrients that will cause the cells to multiply, but not just multiply, but do so quickly and into high densities.
Wake up, I wanna lift you up, I wanna dress you up, let's be friends.
It was an out-of-body experience to sit there and eat a chicken, but have the chicken that you're eating running around in front of you. You don't imagine doing something like that.
So you take one cell. We can grow steak like that, chicken, beef, the whole lot. You take a cell from an animal, could be a zebra, could be a panda, and you can grow meat. And then in terms of texture and everything else, basically that's just a refinement problem. Communications, I mentioned earlier, basically that if you wanted to get your digital product or service out, we have 3.5 billion people connected today. Low Earth orbit satellites, basically we're sending 12,000 up at the moment. They connect the other 3.5 billion people on the planet. What happens if there's one Elon Musk in those 3.5 billion people? From a construction perspective, we are 3D printing buildings, and we are getting to the point where we can create fully autonomous construction sites. And we do this in Dubai, as well as all around the world. The regulators are approving all of these as well. This is now coming through. You can do this, you can live in these houses. You can 3D print a 4-story house for $24,000 in 8 hours. When I showed just this one video to around 100 council leaders at the Chelsea Flower Show last year, they had all of the property management companies and all the builders in the room, and they started freaking out, because this is happening in other places, in other parts of the world. You want to scale this, it's a robotics and a process problem. Starting next year, we're going to 3D print an 80-story skyscraper in Dubai, and we just 3D printed a 24-site community in a day. Energy. At the moment, basically, it's a traditional solar cell. If you go to IKEA, basically, it's about 17% energy efficient. However, we've got a whole variety of new energy technologies coming through. If you use Perscovite solar panels, you get to 32% energy efficiency. If you use genetically re-engineered bacteria, you can get up to 50% energy efficiency on a solar panel. If you put carbon nanotubes to reclaim the heat in a solar panel, you get a solar panel that is 80% efficient. If you put graphene on the top of a solar panel, you can generate energy from rain. Fossil fuels is dead. You take these solar panels, bearing in mind that increasingly they can be flexible, and if you consider electric cars, basically that changes very dramatically, very quickly. But today we're here, fossil fuels, we've got biofuels coming through, lithium alternatives, because lithium's a rare earth element, so we have lithium metal and all sorts of things. Polymer batteries, a polymer battery will charge your electric car to 400-mile range, courtesy of University of Bristol in about 3 seconds. Wireless charging. If I can wirelessly charge my car and I can put my supercharger infrastructure in the right place, I can get rid of 80% of the lithium-ion batteries. Bio batteries, they last forever. Printed lithium-ion 500 times the energy density. Once you get here, you get electric aircraft. You keep going. There is not one thing changing. There is hundreds of things changing. Retail, we've got 2 more videos, and then that's it. Retail. This collapses global supply chains, global manufacturing.
Welcome to Carbon. We're a technology company changing the way the world makes things, specifically 3D printed things. We didn't start out trying to change manufacturing forever.
We didn't?
No, we didn't.
We started with the simple goal of making 3D printed parts better.
It's 25 to 100 times faster, which is game-changing.
But we quickly realized that with our combination of technology and materials, we could make real parts with mechanical properties and surface finishes that make injection molded plastics obsolete by comparison. Embracing the idea that speed to production isn't an obstacle anymore. It's the only way forward. And our partners share our enthusiasm for reinventing the rules. Partners who are manufacturing at scale, making millions of real products.
Like us?
Yeah, like you. In partnership with Adidas, we've created a midsole that shouldn't exist so that they could make a shoe that shouldn't exist. Light, super flexible, highly durable, and printed straight from liquid. A marvel of design and function, this shoe defies logic. And whether you want to make 1 or 1 million, this is true, customizable, and on-demand mass manufacturing. This is not a publicity stunt. This is a revolution. And we're just getting started. Stop prototyping, start producing.
Under Armour got an artificial intelligence to design a new trainer for them called the Architect. It's $300. It did that in the first day. In the evening, they went home. The second day, they 3D printed it out. Product to shelf, 18 months down to 2 days. Adidas are doing this as well. You eliminate, from a retail perspective, you eliminate all the inventory. Someone can go onto a website, either get an artificial intelligence to design a trainer or a piece of clothing for them, like Amazon are doing. Or you can design it. You then decide, you then try it on using augmented reality mirrors, virtual reality, whatever it happens to be. You then buy it, it gets printed off in the back. You eliminate inventory, you eliminate the need for global manufacturing, you can improve personalization, you can charge more of a premium for your products. That one thing disrupts most industries and quite a lot of sovereign economies. And then, this is the last bit, from a transportation perspective, have you ever considered this? When I take the steering wheel, the dashboard and pedals out of your car, do you have a car or do you have a pod? You have a pod. The car is dying now. When I have a pod, all of a sudden it's an empty space. I can go to Mercedes now and convince them to go and buy Netflix and become a payments company and a healthcare company and a retail company and all this sort of stuff. This is a Lamborghini. It's coming out roughly in 2030. This doesn't use any lithium-ion batteries at all because the shell of the car is what we call a structural battery. So I mentioned earlier, basically, lithium-ion will have a relatively short lifespan. We already see cars from Lightyear 1, Toyota and Hyundai that are using flexible solar panels on them, bearing in mind that solar is getting more efficient, and we can eliminate lithium-ion. However, last one, why talk about cars? This is coming 2024. It's already had 70-odd flight tests. The FAA have approved the first phase of this. How would you like to live in London and work on Bondi? wondering about the sustainability footprint of liquid oxygen, we now have green rocket fuel coming through, courtesy of NASA and SpaceX. And that's it. So the only thing that is changing is everything. The pace of change is accelerating. There is no part of any industry that is immune from this change at all. So we've gone through a lot. Thank you for your patience and your time, and I hope you enjoyed it.